Jeffrey Archer, tell me the moment you decided you were a Conservative. Was it a particular political event or a politician that inspired you?
It's a tricky one, that one, because I'll answer it. I won't avoid it. When I was in the House of Commons, I found I was as much in line with several members of the Labour Party as I was with the Conservative Party. But the problem is, I believe in free enterprise and I see no harm in profit. And I therefore couldn't see how I would fit into the Labour Party, though I have to admit that I became a friend of Harold Wilson's, but I was never a friend of Ted Heath's.
Why not?
Harold, by the way, was a wicked old charmer. I mean, the best. I remember the day I entered the house, I was only 29 and I was terrified of the place. I bet you were absolutely terrified of the place. And so we had in those days a ticker tape machine in the hall that runs on the corridor that runs from one end of the Commons to the other. And I saw the Prime Minister heading towards me. And I thought the only way out is to look at the ticker tape machine and see if he just kindly walked by. So he pops up and looks at the ticker tape machine himself. I've just taken Louth with 10,000 and punched him on the nose. And he looks down at the ticker tape machine, and it's the result of the Commonwealth Games 100 yards. And he looks at them and he said, lad, you'd have won the first one, you would have been third in the second one, and you'd have been rubbish in the third. And I loved him ever since. I love the fact that he knew I'd run for my country. I thought, Ted Heath just walked past. He came the other way and he just walked past. I'd given him a 10,000 majority and he just walked past. So, yes, I've been a Conservative all my life. I will be a Conservative all my life. But like so many members in the centre of both parties, it was a tricky decision.
But you voted Conservative in every single election.
Every single election.
You're elected in 1969 in Louth as an MP at 29, but you resign in 1974. How difficult was that?
Well, it was very difficult because I assumed I was going to be Prime Minister. I mean, one can't be bothering to come in at 29 to sit around and chat to people like you. I presume I'd got a job to do. No, the truth is that looking back on it, I went in too young. 29 was too young. I remember Sajid Javid coming to me when he was only 32, 33 and saying, I want to be a member of Parliament, Jeffrey, will you? And I said, don't make the mistake I made of going in too young. Do something else, get yourself financially secure with your family and with a proper job, and then consider politics, which he did. He took 10 years off and worked for Deutsche Bank. And he went into the House much later and became Chancellor in 4 or 5 years. So I didn't take my own advice. He did. I wish I'd entered the House at about the age of 35, 36, 37. I wish I'd been a lot more mature. It was distressing to have to leave at the next election. Of course it was, because I love the House, as I suspect you did. There's nothing wrong with the House. I actually loved politics at that level. And I've kept a close interest ever since. I mean, I then went on to work for Margaret Thatcher and for John Major. So I didn't lose interest. And I'm fascinated and proud of the fact that when I stood for Mayor of London, if you look at the names of the people on my organising committee, I'm very proud to see that Nadim Zahawi is now our Minister of Jabs. Sajid, of course, became Chancellor. Priti Patel is Home Secretary. Toby Elwood was Minister of State in Defence. Robert Halfon was in the cabinet. Out of my 7 people. Now you may say, what about the others, Jeffrey? And I can tell you, Kwasi Kwarteng has done quite well. And perhaps the one who's done best of all is Stephen Shakespeare, who opened a company called YouGov, and I, in my opinion, probably beat the lot of them.
So you've got some friends who are now in high places. Which of those people that you mentioned, you must think this, they're going to end up at the top?
It's always a tricky one. I'm not bluffing because you'll have had exactly the same experience with your contemporaries. I'm not bluffing. I didn't see a prime minister among them. I could see that they would make the cabinet. And I wasn't at all shocked when Nadim Zahawi was given the jobs of injecting us all, because he's a go-getter. He's a businessman. He's a man who likes to make things happen. So that didn't surprise me at all. And of course, I was delighted when Kwasi made it to the top and Sajid, because it's all very well to talk about divergence, but I was clearly doing it in London without thinking about it. And people would say to me, gosh, have you planned that, Jeremy? I said, no, I happen to choose the best people available, which is what you should do. You should pick the best people available. And it just wasn't a coincidence that in my London team, 7 fulfilled all the sort of rules that are now being demanded.
In 1976, it is the start of your career as a really successful author. In fact, you make a fortune from your book sales. You have another book on the way, I believe. Is it more gratifying than politics, though?
Well, I'm interested in the way you even said the word fortune, as if it was some evil word that had come out of the devil. How dare you make money writing books, Jeffrey? That's disgraceful.
It wasn't meant like that.
It wasn't meant. Oh,
I'm quite envious.
It was a shock. The first book, Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less, I got a £3,000 advance, and they only just managed to sell 3,000 copies. The second book, I got a £20,000 advance, which would be fairly hard to live on with a wife and 2 children. The breakthrough was the third book, Cain and Abel, which I confess sold 1 million books in the first week and changed my whole life.
You're writing these hugely successful books. In September 1985, you're made deputy chairman of the Conservative Party. How did it feel when you got that call? Who called you, in fact, to invite you to do
Margaret
it?
called direct to explain that Norman Tebbit had been involved, which of course I knew, in the bomb plot, and tragically his wife, Margaret also, tragically his wife was very badly injured. And although Norman wished to stay in politics, he realized there would be he would have to take care of her. And indeed, he was a faithful and honorable husband. She said, you know, Jeffrey, he isn't going to be able to travel around the country. So I'm putting you in charge of the country while he runs everything from central office. So I had to go around to the constituencies. And when the election came, I was given the 32 key marginal seats that would decide who governed. And I found that a very exciting job. And also worked directly in the evenings with the Prime Minister. Someone ran her life through the day. I took her through to wherever she was speaking, put her on the plane or train back to London. So got to know her very well then. But actually, Mary and I got to know her a lot better after she resigned. We were already good friends, but after she resigned. And her affection for Mary was every bit as great as it might have been for me, because of course, Margaret was educated at Somerville and read chemistry. Mary taught chemistry years later at Somerville. So there was a natural affinity between the two of them. And I just admired her determination. I love the fact she did all the things I was no good at. She was tremendous on detail, tremendous on going through everything very carefully indeed before she even breathed. And she didn't believe in focus groups. I remember her saying once, you can get on the bus or you can get off it, your choice. And she meant it.
You spent a period of time in prison. I've read your prison diaries.
Oh, thank you.
They're a fascinating read. Did it change your views on crime, punishment, how we lock people up in this country?
Yes, and indeed, as you'll remember, I wrote a bit about that in the book, as well as going a day-to-day chronicle, which was the first aim. Yes, I realized, one, how privileged I'd been, what an amazing life I'd led. And I kept meeting people. I mean, there were some ghastly, evil crooks there. Of course there were, and they were awful. But I met a lot of people who definitely, their upbringing didn't help. They got into bad ways that didn't help. And the saddest of all, there were two very sad ones who I remained in close touch with. One who'd been, well, it's all in the book, one who'd been raped as a child, a man, and ended up killing the man who'd raped him. I mean, yes, the answer to your question was when he told me the story, I just thought how lucky I'd been. And then the other one went for me when I first arrived in prison, said I was a privileged, snooty snob. Everything he could come up with, he did. But it struck me, his name was Billy Little, it struck me that he was a very intelligent man. So I said, I was out of that terrible prison in 3 weeks. And I said to him, look, sit down for a moment and listen, which he did reluctantly. I said, you want to do an education? I will pay for anything it costs to get you what you need, the books, the tutors, whatever it takes. I'm very proud to have attended his Bachelor of Arts ceremony, still in prison. And sadly, I don't know what you'll make of this, having been a human rights person yourself. I don't know what you'll make about what I'm about to tell you. He left prison with a Bachelor of Arts, found it very difficult to get a job, and died of drink 3 years later. And I just thought again, I was doubly sad because he asked to see me and he came up to the flat with what I would call a very attractive, intelligent, middle-aged woman. And I remember thinking, I'll be all right, Billy will be all right. She'll knock him into shape. She'll get him. And even she couldn't manage it. So yes, is the answer to your question. I'm very affected by it. And of course, it influenced a lot of my works. I then wrote Prisoner of Birth. I then wrote a set of short stories based on prison. One of them, which would tell you everything I feel, about an Irishman who used to go to prison every winter because it was cold. And he used to get himself a 6-month sentence and then come back out. And I did write about it. You're quite right.
When I started out in journalism in my early 20s at the BBC, but I used to hear about your legendary parties, that you would host like these legendary parties for the great and the good. And everybody wanted to be invited to your parties. When you went to prison, how many people stood by you and how many of those people who would come to your parties?
At my last party, that's 20 years ago you're discussing. At my last party, there were 4 people not invited who didn't stand by me. And the party was attended on the 2 nights by 600 people. My friends stood by me. Good friends do stand by you. They don't walk away. 4 walked away, and I've never spoken to them since. So the answer to your question is that I was going to have my 80th birthday party last year, but sadly, COVID interrupted that. And when I looked at the guest list, 98% had accepted. But that doesn't mean you're going to be invited.
Early 20s dream shattered. We've talked about a lot of politicians in today's Conservative Party, the big figures, but we haven't mentioned Boris Johnson. How's he doing as Prime Minister?
Very much better than I thought. I didn't think he was a natural for the job, whereas my earlier mention of Kenneth Clarke, whose views on Europe finally stopped him holding the highest office, but then he was so sincere about that, you wouldn't have changed his views on that. I thought he was a natural to be prime minister. And there are moments when Boris is quite brilliant, almost Churchillian. And there are moments like yesterday, my wife was pointing out to me at lunch, because I'd been writing all morning, that he'd said some statement about greed, which is capturing the headlines. And I haven't yet caught up with it. I will by this evening. But he's going to do that. He's a maverick. But my bet is it doesn't surprise me that he's 16 points ahead of Keir Starmer, because I thought Keir Starmer was the obvious choice after Jeremy Corbyn. The obvious choice. Solid, sensible, very well educated, a lawyer by training. I thought, we're in trouble. This man will take Boris apart. And you know, I'm not sure in the first few weeks of his leadership, I think he probably did take Boris apart. And I thought we would be in real trouble. But to my surprise, well, the Conservative Party is 16 points ahead. And the by-election in your part of the world will be very important indeed. He has to win that. Boris doesn't have to win it. Parties in government rarely win by-elections, and especially the Conservatives in the north of England. So if Boris wins that, I don't know what your trade union movement will feel, because they've got a candidate sitting in Manchester who wants the job, and history could change again.
And at the end of all these conversations that we do with the prominent people that we talk to about their politics, we try and sum them up, what we've learned about their politics based on what we've learned. You're a compassionate Conservative, an absolute loyalist of the Conservative Party. And I wouldn't normally bring up someone's personality in these summaries, but you can't help saying, when you get knocked down, you get straight back up.
That's very kind. You've missed out the thing I care, well, not your fault because it didn't arise, I care most about, and that's women's rights. I fought all my political life for women's rights, and I like to believe, watching my wife become chairman of a great hospital and becoming a dame because the hospital won the best hospital in Britain 2 years in her last 3, and now chairman of the Science Museum. I like to believe that I fought hard, and I'm very proud of the fact that I was the first person. It failed, but I was the first person to bring in the primogeniture bill, because I thought it was ridiculous that the firstborn to the royal family was not automatically the king or queen. And you could be born 3 women in a row and then a man, and the man would become the king. I thought was lunacy. My bill failed because the Prime Minister asked me if I would withdraw it, because he said he had to speak to every member of the Commonwealth before such a bill could go ahead. And I accepted that without question, and very proud of the fact that 7 years later, it became the law of the land.
Is there a woman Conservative that you think she should have been leader?
No, I think in your party, if I dare to say that, I think Yvette Cooper strikes me as an extremely able woman, and why she's not on the front bench is beyond me. I'm not going to be rude about your shadow chancellor, but
You are.
if you can leave Yvette Cooper on the back benches, you ought to have a jolly strong front bench.
Jeffrey Archer, what a fascinating conversation. Thank you for sharing your personality politics with us. Thank you.
Thank you.